It's almost universal, whether it's 2 wheels, 4 wheels, 18 wheels, no wheels. So many of us have a special memory involving a vehicle or a story about a car we've loved. Even if you can't tell a crankshaft from a drive shaft, I want to hear the story of the vehicle that moved you. I'm Blake Jackson, and this is Auto-Biography. Next guest on the Auto-Biography podcast, these guys have a new album called OUTTA SIGHT coming up June 3rd. They're going to be playing in Red Deer at Beau's Bar and Stage on November 28th. Their new single, Find the Truth, is awesome. They're the Sheepdogs, and from the Sheepdogs, we've got Ryan Gullen and Jim Boskill. Guys, welcome to the Auto-Biography podcast. Tell us about the vehicle that moved you.
Our first tour van was a 90s dog, Plymouth Voyager that I got for us from my parents. It was like an old family van.
Gonna pump the brakes and tell you about the Plymouth Voyager. I just tried to jazz it up a bit because what else can you do? The thing is, though, they didn't have to be fancy. They lasted forever. They were a great van. In fact, they were the first ever minivan. Manufactured from 1984 to 2000. Some of them were actually kind of cool. One actually had a turbocharged 4-cylinder with a 5-speed, which sounds kind of cool. The thing is, though, they weren't made for love. If the van was rocking, it probably had a bad lifter on your head.
We had kind of a crazy time with that van because basically it kept getting broken into, I think 6 times over the course, and to the point where it actually got like written off. It broke down. We were driving between Saskatoon and Calgary, and basically it was sort of on its last legs. We got broken into once in Toronto, and then a couple days later in Waterloo. We made it back to Saskatchewan, and then we were on our way to Calgary for a show. And we made it about an hour out of Saskatoon and sort of like got to a gas station or something and noticed there was a lot of transmission fluid kind of splattered all over the back of it. And we made it close as far as Airdrie, and we stopped in Airdrie, left our van in the parking lot of the Canadian Tire, and got right in for our show in Calgary. We came back, and our van was gone.
Oh.
And there's glass everywhere. And we sort of assumed, we were like, well, nobody stole it because you wouldn't have been able to drive it. And so we called the police, and basically someone had broken in for a third time that time. And after 3 broken windows, it was basically written off. So we actually avoided having to deal with the transmission. It's probably the greatest thing ever. Got a rental vehicle. We went all the way to Vancouver Island. We played our show. We had a couple of days off, and then we were heading back Alberta way to Banff. And we had a night off. Went downtown to Victoria, left our van, the rental van, parked in a parking lot in Victoria, ended up getting taking a cab back to where we were staying, came back, same thing, broken glass, van gone. And it was like, oh my gosh, it was broken into, the new van was broken into the rental van. And then we had a deadhead drive from Victoria all the way to Banff to make it in time for our gig. Because it was a rental and it was under my name, I was the only one who was able to drive. So basically, I knuckled it through the mountains, cross the ferry all through Rogers Pass, all the way overnight by myself with the guys in the band cheering me on, giving me coffee and a bottle of Coke and stuff, and we were just trying to keep me awake so I could keep driving. And that's a lot of harrowing drives. And we have been broken into several times since, and that was quite the run. From there, we ended up getting a 1980 sort of old rural school bus. It had school bus seats. I still have a scar on my arm because me and my grandpa torched off the rusted out. Basically the seats were bolted to underneath the undercarriage of the van, and I still have a scar on my arm for where I was trying to basically torch off these rusted old bolts to pull out these little bus seats so you could have it. We built a van in there, and then we had that van forever. It is so loud in the center console of the engine on the inside. And we basically would have to crank our stereo as loud as it could go in order to just hear over the engine block. It had no air conditioning. So it would just be sitting on these hot vinyl seats, and no air conditioning with just the engine just blasting the whole time. So we had that van, and then from there we got a 1998 same van. And it's an amazing thing between the 80 and the 98 was that we had built this bed in the back, and the screw sets in the back were exactly the same. So I just took the bed out of the 1980 van and put it into the 1998 van, screwed it in the same screw hole still existed on the outside of the back of the van. And we had this 98. So our last van we had 10 years ago was a 1998 Dodge Ram van.
It's different on tour, I guess, these days with, I want to say iPod, but that's probably passe. You can listen to anything on your phone, videos, streaming services, et cetera, et cetera. I was talking with Randy Bachman, and he said that way back, you know, when television went off the air at 11 p.m., there was barely even radio and there was nothing to do. He and Burton Cummings would actually entertain each other by going through the phone books and looking for weird names and doing goofy stuff like that. Do you guys goof around like that? Do you have any sort of band traditions to keep you occupied?
Definitely been known to make some prank phone calls. I won't name any names, but we've definitely done some prank phone calls before. We had a TV that had a VHS attached to it, like we would play VHS, and we brought VHS tapes, or we would you know, plug a portable DVD player into it and watch friggin' book with the DVDs. Like, you know, it was definitely not like what it was like in 1971 or something like that. Yeah, you just basically have to you just end up listening to music and podcasts and joking around, and you definitely get a little squirrely on those long drives, especially because we used to, back in the day especially, we used to drive, we played a lot of Toronto, so we kind of decided that you could only play Thunder Bay and Winnipeg once, so we would either drive straight from Saskatoon to Toronto, play Toronto, which is a 36-hour drive, and then drive back and play Thunder Bay and Sault Ste. Marie and Winnipeg or whatever. And so we would always do these drives. We'd get up at 10 o'clock in the morning and drive until we got to Toronto, just switching out. You definitely get pretty squirrely on those drives, and you start, being pretty weird and and whatever. So, I mean, you've done a lot of those types of drives too.
It's funny that Toronto to Thunder Bay, it's like you know what you're getting into, but it always feels way longer than it. Well, it's a long drive. It's a crazy long drive, but it always feels longer somehow, It's
those slowdowns in those small towns.
Yeah, totally. And there's not much in between,
Jim, I was wondering about your experience. How old were you when you actually started playing as a professional?
I was 11.
That must have been a different experience for you heading out there and playing these venues.
It was, yeah. And, I was playing a lot of bars at the time, and obviously much too young to be in bars. So I had a lot of situations where I'd be kind of sitting in the kitchen in between sets, and talking to the staff and just kind of hanging out. Not drinking pints, obviously,
And in general, when you're playing in band, and same thing when you're 11 or you're 25 or whatever, you're not just playing a Friday and Saturday in Calgary and Edmonton or something like that. It's like you're playing like a Tuesday in, Cranbrook or something. And, you're going to weird places and you're hanging in bars every single night. And whether you're, a young kid or whether it's you're meeting weird people, the types of people that hang out in bars that are having a band that no one's heard of play on a Tuesday night, you definitely meet some weird folks and have some weird experiences. I mean, that's kind of part of the charm, and also what is sort of weird about traveling.
You've mentioned traveling coast to coast in a rickety old van. What are some of the vehicle MacGyver tips that you've picked up along the way?
I mean, we had a lot of situations where, your van overheats and you got to pop the radiator cap off. And that was always one. I mean, none of us really are amazing mechanics. You sort of learn a bit. But yeah, you're kind of trying to put a blanket over yourself or something while your van is steaming to the 30 degrees outside. I mean, I don't know any sort of tips, Jim. You got any hot tips? I feel like it's always you're caught up to the task and something goes wrong and you're just trying to figure it out or find someone in this town that can help you out.
Yeah, for sure. It's always good to keep cooling around, that's for sure. Mm-hmm. And a couple of rags in case you do got to pull a rad cap off on the engine side, because that's always a little bit daunting. It's good to have a jug of oil, man, I kind of keep a little
booster cables, I guess.
Cables for sure, yeah.
Well, I was cranking Find the Truth all day at work and all day in my truck, and I love it. Ryan, I was trying to place who your bass playing reminded me of, and it finally hit me when Love the One You're With came on afterwards. You remind me of Stephen Still's bass player from that album. So for me, that's high
Wow,
praise.
I appreciate that.
Yeah,
That's rock.
Yeah, I'll take that. I appreciate it.
I'd say you got a little Geezer Butler in you too, man.
Yeah, maybe more in look, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Last time I saw Sheepdogs, Jimmy, I'm not sure if you were with the band yet. It was in Red Deer during our big fair in the arena. And the closing number, the encore, was a cover of Southern Man. And you did it better than Neil ever did it. Is there a... Don't tell anyone. Are there any dream cover tunes that you'd still like to do?
It's funny, that's a topic of discussion often, you know. But we end up running a bunch of stuff and like bring a bunch of ideas and just kind of see what fits. But we definitely covered some pretty cool stuff. Like we did a cover of Whippin' Post.
Nice.
By the Allman Brothers.
The night they drove Old Dixie down, there was a tour we did every night. We did that one. A long one was down by the river by Neil Young. Yeah, Southern Man we were doing for a while. I mean, it's sort of one of those things where you don't want to do the same cover over and over again, because some bands do that. They have their version of whatever. So we try to mix it up. We did a run of shows in Toronto right when sort of SARS was back up. We could play 4 nights at Lee's House, which is like sort of the 600 capacity venue and a small sort of bar. We sort of started a little bit in Toronto, and we did a run of shows there for the 4 nights, and we kind of mixed it up. We were doing rock and roll hoochie coo on that one, which is kind of a fun one. It's like it's a topic of discussion. Come up with something that's like interesting and new, but maybe not like so obscure that people won't really know what it is. So we try to do it in our own style, not just like a straight up cover. But sometimes like a Southern Man, we definitely would, did that very much in the style of Neil. So
it was sweet when we did Hold Your Head High too, man. That was awesome. Seamus sang that one.
Oh God! Would you take a suggestion? Just to mull.
Sure.
Cowboy Song by Thin Lizzy.
Oh yeah, I'd like to do that. I mean, there's a bunch of songs you'd like to do by Thin Lizzy. Cowboy Song would be sweet. That'd be sweet. I'd throw that in the pile for sure.
Well, guys, I'm grateful that you took the time, both of you, to call in. November 28th, Sheepdogs are playing at Beau's Bar and Stage. Out of Sight is available June 3rd, and actually singles from the album, including Find the Truth, are out right now. So, Jim and Ryan, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks
so much for having us. Yeah, appreciate it.
There's Ryan and Jimmy from the Sheepdogs, and once again, they're playing November 28th, Beau's Bar and Stage. Tickets available online. That's going to be a great show. They're always great shows from those guys. And the album, which I'm loving already, it comes out in its entirety. It's called Out of Sight on June 3rd. I'm Blake Jackson. Thanks again for tuning into the Auto-Biography podcast. If you have a story, please let us know. Just look us up online. You can get a hold of us any way you like, and please tell a friend if you do like the show. It's time for another story. Next guest on the Auto-Biography podcast, creator, host, producer, and director of My Car Story with Lou Costabile. Traveling the U.S. and getting all kinds of stories from people with all kinds of cars. Lou's the best. He's the best at what he does and what I really want to do. So, Lou, please tell us about the vehicle that moved you.
Well, the first vehicle that moved me was, at a young age, was the Batmobile.
Gotta pump the brakes and tell you about the 1966 Batmobile. This is one of my favorites, too. It was built by George Barris. He was a car customizer. They were filming the Batman series, and of course, they needed a Batmobile. He had 3 weeks to turn a 1955 Lincoln Futura concept car into the Batmobile, and he did it. It took $15,000. It included a 390 from a Ford Galaxy and 40 coats of black lacquer. Now, it was cool, and it could actually lay a lot of rubber. They built 5 versions, including a dragster that they would take out to drag strips for promotional purposes, and that had a 427 Chevy in it. Now, that's real life. As far as in the Gotham City universe, it had a bunch of gadgets like the Bat Phone, the Batman and Robin safety seats, the Bat safety belt, the Bat scope, the Bat dissolving switch, the Bat trunk locks, which were a big thing in 1966. The Bat-Zuka, the Bat Deflector, the Bat Ray, the superpowered Bat Magnet, and most impressive, the Bat Glove Compartment. And what did he keep in the Bat Glove Compartment? Robin's hot pants.
I was interested in the show, and then when they hit that Bat Cave and they went down the pole, still interested, and then they saw the Batmobile, and I was like, that's it. That's the best ever. So that was the car that said it all, and it really was the car because it was a superhero just like the superheroes.
Instantly recognizable. I think actually on your Facebook page, you're in a 66 Batmobile.
I am in the 66 Batmobile as often as possible. Anytime someone has one, I'm usually around it.
Watching 66 Batman, of course, the Adam West one, and no.
Yep.
All kinds of gadgets. Were any of them real?
I want to take one step back to talk about George Barris. So the only time I met George Barris was my wife surprised me, and it was actually right before I started the YouTube channel, which was disappointing because it would have been a great interview, but it was George Barris at Barrett Jackson selling the Batmobile number 1. And according to the rumors, there are 5 of them. But of course, George had a tendency to produce things and continue to sell some things. So you never really know, but that's the story I understand. And by chance, so I met George because as I was admiring the car with many other people around it, George, it turns out that his daughter saw me so excited about it. And she said to me, you really like the car? I said, yeah, it's a great car. She says, would you like to meet my father? And I didn't know who her father was, but she was inside the ropes around the Batmobile. And I said, sure. And she sat me down literally next to George Barris, and he signed my Batmobile book, which had all the other Batmobiles in it. And we got a chance to talk just for a second. But clearly most of the gadgets were, not real. But like the bat phone or the big turn signal underneath the bat signal that turns the car around in literally a 180 fashion. And the Batmobile, actually, the interesting thing about that day was I could see the Batmobile wasn't exactly like the Batmobile in the TV show. And I asked it because it had like marker lights on it and things like that, which of course the Batmobile show was in 66 and side marker lights didn't happen until 68. And this Batmobile had side marker lights on it. So they said, hey, this car was a work in progress. So it was constantly updated, to his liking as he drove it around and showed it off.
Through my radio career, the one experience that really sticks out, I did have a chance to have George Barris in the studio before he passed.
Wow.
Consummate storyteller. My co-host was afraid that I was going to go off on talking about engines and Bondo and fiberglass, but he really gets it, just like you. It's about the stories behind those cars. As far as other television vehicles or movie vehicles, I think I saw you in the Monkeys GTO. What else sticks out for you?
I videoed, and it's not out on the channel yet, so stay tuned if you go to the YouTube channel, My Car Story with Lou. But I videoed the very first, a prototype Jaguar sports car, and I'll just leave it right there.
Okay. How old would that be?
I'm gonna have some fun with you. What year do you think it would be?
Very first Jaguar sports car, 1932.
1935. Very good.
Right on. Well, I can't wait for that one.
Yeah.
So that's coming soon to a screen near you. So looking back on what you've learned about vehicles, what are some of the things you've learned that stick out? I'll give you an example of what I'm thinking of. In 1967, Camaros came with an option of methyl hydrate aerosols in the back wheel wells, liquid chains. So you could hit a button and it would spray basically alcohol on your tires to get you out of ice. What sticks out for you, examples like that?
And I'm smiling at you. First of all, how I'd like to start by answering your question is every single car, even though I videoed over 1,700 different cars, every time I do a video, I learn something new. Every time. So it's no longer, am I going to learn? It's, what are you going to learn? And I like to go to a car show, or I like to go to someone's garage, not knowing everything they have. So it's a little bit like Christmas to me when I walk in there. I open up the presents. And I think that's what keeps the enthusiasm that I have, that I hope shows on the channel. real, because I truly am seeing it like they are sometimes for the first time, and we're going over the car together. And I think that's what makes it exciting, is that, you open up the present. But to answer a specific question on options, and again, I'll just do some of the ones. I mean, when I videoed that 35 Jaguar, everything was new, what I mean? So that was new. I recently videoed a car that I've only read about and seen pictures of. I videoed a 1962 Ferrari GTO 250 GTO, which is the most expensive car ever, I believe. And, learning about that car was, from the ground up. I mean, I'd seen tons of pictures, I've read stories, but seeing it and hearing it from the caretaker is always new. So back to options. I was in a Buick station wagon, and there was this little clip next to the radio, and it looked almost like a paper clip that you could pull down. And I said, "What's this?" And he said, "That's a factory purse holder."
What?
I said, "Okay, that's new for me." So that was new. I can remember the first time I met Ken Nagel, and I got in his DeSoto Fire Dome, and there was a record player sitting in the console, and it wasn't a 33.5. I think it was a 16.25, or somebody will correct me, 16.5 record player. That was a factory record player. And then, of course, you have the factory records you could purchase with it as options.
Novelty like that, and thinking of how much vehicles have changed. They used to have swing-out steering wheels, so it was easier to get into the car, and swing-out bucket seats and that sort of thing. What was your first car?
My first car was a 65 Chevrolet. It was a hand-me-down from the family, and without much time that I had it, I drove it over a railroad track, kind of like a Dukes of Hazzard thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I bottomed out the transmission, so when I opened the hood, the trans bolts were blown out, and it looked like a helicopter because the fan was sticking straight up looking at me.
So that was it for the 65 Chevy.
That was it for the 65. There was no that was its last day.
Has there been a holy grail for you as far as chasing cars, or something you've wanted to get on film, something you've been interested in, but it's been elusive?
Yeah, it would be the 66 Batmobile #1. It's Rick Champagne bought it that day, and I guess it sat in his living room, from what I understand. But I never had met him, and I understood he sold the car, and I'm not sure exactly where it's at, but I believe it's on the East Coast right now. So that's the one. That's the one that's escaping me right now. Obviously, I missed it with George Barris. I wasn't doing my car story at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I was doing it later that year, but I wasn't doing it at that time. So that's still the one.
I remember reading an article about the Bullitt Mustang and how it was actually a very involved search to, find it and then authenticate it. Have you heard of any other vehicular mysteries, like looking for the #1 Batmobile or looking for the Bullitt Mustang? Are there any, and I'm pulling this out of nowhere because you've talked to so many car people, maybe you've heard, are there any vehicular urban myths?
Yeah, there's they might not be on that level, right? Where, and let's take the Monkey Mobile as an example of that. The Monkey Mobile was found in, I believe it was Puerto Rico at a hotel. It was painted something like pink, and it went to Australia first, and then it somehow ended up in Puerto Rico, and someone recognized it, and then they purchased it from the hotel, and then they, recreated it to the best of their ability, and still trying to keep some of the patina in it. But that car was actually a Dean Jeffries car, not a George Barris car, because I think George Barris built a second one that was, there's a difference in the interior. One's got a tan interior, one's got a white interior.
What vehicle maintenance advice, if you could quickly give one tip, what would it be?
Just change the oil.
Good enough. They say engines are expensive, but oil is cheap.
I'll give you an example of that. Why I say that is I had one vehicle, which is on my channel. It was my Ford Explorer. It was a two-door. They called it a Sport. Normally, I'm videoing cars, my car story with Lou, but my Explorer was getting so many miles from me traveling all over the place that it ended up having its last run at 345,000 miles. So people were kind of like, what's happening with the Explorer? They'd see it drive up. I'd jump out with my camera. literally sometimes based on where I'm at, I would literally jump out with my camera. It could be at a gas station or it could be somewhere else. And I'd video part, somebody's car and jump back in.
How are people with that? I'm always really self-conscious because I don't want them to think that I'm sizing something up to get my hands on later or something like that. Has anyone ever objected?
Oh yeah, there's it's not often at this point, which is really kind of people. When you're doing a YouTube channel, it kind of evolves. It's not like the day one is just like, I've been doing it now for 8.5 years. So, day one, you don't even know what you don't even know. So you're almost naive. You just walk up to people and, hey, can I video your car? And, I videoed the first 350 cars, I think, and never started any of them. So then you start to evolve and you start to recognize what people like. Plus, I will say, no matter what you're doing, regardless of YouTube, just to be successful as far as in your career, talking about career, if you will, is number one, you got to be determined. All right. And if you're determined, let me define that. Like in something like martial arts or something, when you get knocked down, you got to get back up. You just don't sit down. And if you keep coming back, then I'm going to use the martial arts as an example, then you're going to start to get higher belts, right? And you're going to have to start to have some success. Okay, hey, now I broke a board. Now I'm, fighting people and I'm not getting beat up all the time. Just the same with YouTube. Now I'm videoing a car. Now all of a sudden people are telling me they like it. It's a good question, Blake. It took me probably about 150 videos before I actually sent an email, which I had, but I sent an email back to the owner and said, let me know what you think of the video. The first time I jumped into a car, I was terrified that I would pull a light switch and pull a knob off. Now when I jump into a car, and I don't say this boldly, but I'm still careful, but I'm no longer intimidated by the car. It's a car and it's supposed to have its knobs pulled and, it's supposed to be driven and you're supposed to go through the gears and, you're supposed to push the brakes and you're supposed to, open the hood. This is what it's for. You realize that the person who is the caretaker is trusting you and you're inside that realm of trust and you have to treat it like it's your own and maybe even better than your own. And that only builds their confidence in you. So when they see you treat their stuff better than sometimes they would treat it, it builds a lot of confidence.
Mr. Lou Costabile, creator, host, and producer of My Car Story with Lou Costabile, and I will post a link to it. Very cool show, and it's cool to hear about a guy who's as passionate about the Batmobile as I am, and it's neat to know that there's other people getting these stories. Once again, if you have a story, I want to hear it. Look me up and share your story with me. We can have a chat, and we can make you famous as well. So thanks again for tuning in. As always, Auto-Biography Podcast is produced at Communal Creative Studios in downtown Red Deer. See you next time. Till then, keep your wheels on the road and a tarp on your load.